Amish Bucha, Courtney, America's Jewish mother. Welcome back to my channel. I am here today to do my wrap-up and rankings for the month of May. I ended up reading 12 books in the month of May, and honestly, overall, it was a really good reading month because I didn't have anything that was lower than, like, the lowest ranked book that I read this month was 3.25 stars, which is still pretty good, honestly. Like, for me, if I rate a book 3.5 stars or higher, I'm like, yes, this is a solid book. I would recommend it. And 3.25 just means I was like a little disappointed with it. So yeah, I consider that a really big success. So basically, none of these books are duds. So with that said, I will go ahead and do my rankings, and as usual, I've ranked these from the book that I liked the least all the way up to the book that I liked the most, and the ones that I have not already previously talked about at length in a Friday Reads video, I will say a little bit more about here. So my least favorite book of this month was unfortunately Audre Lorde's Zami, A New Spelling of My Name. I did this as a buddy read with Scott of Gunpowder Fiction and Plot. Ended up giving this book 3.25 stars. It's fine. It's perfectly fine as an autobiography or memoir. It's very chronological and episodic, and you do learn a lot of stuff about Audre Lorde's life. It just didn't give me the kind of reflection that I would really like to see in a memoir autobiography. There was a little bit more toward the end, which is why I gave it another quarter star on top of the 3 stars, but I really would have liked to have seen that more throughout the book. So 3.25 stars. And number 11 was Evelyn Shakir's Remember Me to Lebanon, Stories of Lebanese Women in America. I ended up giving this collection, which is a short story collection, 3.5 stars overall. I liked it overall, but I have to say I read this toward the beginning of the month, and like, aside from the one story out of this collection that I read and taught previously, like, none of them are really, like, I really can't remember anything that happened in most of the stories, so I think it's not totally memorable, but as with most short story collections, you know, you're gonna like some in here more than you like others, and, you know, some that I might not have liked, you might like, and vice versa. But I think it's definitely a good collection in terms of, you know, thinking about immigration to the United States and specifically about learning about Lebanese culture. So I would still recommend it, and this was the book that I read in May for my own personal Arab American literature project. So 3.5 stars. Then at number 10 is a book that I finished not that long ago, which was Attica Locke's Bluebird. I did this as a buddy read with Roz of Scally Dandelion about the books. I ended up giving this 3.5 stars. I liked this book fine overall, and I think it picked up for me more in the second half. But I think because I'd heard so much praise of it on BookTube, I think I maybe went into it with expectations that were a little bit too high. Because it is pretty much just like a standard police procedural hard-boiled detective type book, but the thing that Attica Locke does really well here is she really kind of explores the nuances of race and racism in an East Texas environment, and so I appreciated those aspects of the book, but I wish that I had felt more connected to or invested in the main character here, Darren Matthews. But again, I can see why other people like it, but I think, again, this for me was maybe a case of my expectations going in were too high based on the hype around it that I'd heard. But, you know, it's good, and I would recommend it, especially if you like hard-boiled detective, police procedural type things, so 3.5 stars. Okay, then at number 9 was Walter Mosley's The Awkward Black Man. I do not have this here with me because I left it in Athens because, you know, I had to bring a bunch of books here with me when I came up to my parents' house, and that one was a hardcover. It was on the heavier side, and I was just like, I'm not gonna tote this all the way up here just so I can, like, hold it up in this one video. So, but it is at home in Athens. So, anyway, so this is a short story collection. It was the first Walter Mosley book I've ever read. And I gave this collection 3.5 stars, and, you know, similarly to what I said about the Evelyn Shakir collection, you know, not every story you're gonna like. as much as the other ones. Although I will say, I think for me, some of the stories from that collection, I think, have a stronger resonance and I remember more about them than I do the ones out of Evelyn Shakir's book, which is why this one is more higher ranked in the rankings than the Evelyn Shakir book. But yeah, I liked it overall. I thought it was a solid collection. I would be interested to read more from Walter Mosley. So 3.5 stars. At number 8 was Frank Chin, Jeffrey Paul Chan, Lawson Fusawa-Nada, and Sean Wong's third edition of Aiiieeee, an anthology of Asian American writing. I also gave this collection 3.5 stars. This is one that has a lot of prefatory introductory material, and I kind of felt like I got more out of most of that stuff than I did out of the actual stories that were included in the anthology. Although I do think there is a little something there for everybody. There are acts of plays, there are short stories, there are excerpts from novels, and I did enjoy, you know, maybe like 3, 4, 5, something like that, of the actual entries in the anthology. Enough that I've added at least 1 or 2 of them. The longer works to a TBR for next year that I'm already working on in Goodreads. But yeah, so I did like this overall, and it is a collection that has a lot of history to it, because this is a 3rd edition, and I would recommend it if you want to know more about the history of Asian American literature, particularly in the first half of the 20th, in the first half up to like mid 20th century. So yeah, 3.5 stars. Then at number 7 was Terence Hayes' collection of poetry, How to Be Drawn. I gave this collection 3.75 stars. This is a collection that mainly centers on art, and the construction of art and how we see and interpret art. And so there were references in here that I didn't always get. And I felt like I would have gotten more out of this collection had I known all of the references that Terence Hayes was making. But as I have said before, I am a lazy pleasure reader. So, you know, yeah, okay, fine. Maybe I got to the end of the poem and looked up who, like, the main person was that was getting talked about. But it's not like I thought too hard about it or anything. So, but I did think this was a good collection, and I did enjoy a number of the poems in here. Structurally, they're interesting, and I definitely will read more by Terence Hayes in the future, so 3.75 stars. Then at number 6 was Charles Yu's Interior Chinatown. I ended up giving this book 4 stars. I quite liked it overall. This is a book that I'm not going to say too much about it because I feel like I think it's still in the BookTube prize right now for fiction, and, you know, it's been all over the place on BookTube, so I don't really think I have to say that much about it, but it is set up in the form of a screenplay, and it does center on Willis Wu, who has these Hollywood roles of generic Asian man and aspires to be quote-unquote kung fu guy, which is the highest role to which an Asian actor can aspire at this point. And so it really sort of follows him on his journey to become kung fu guy, and you learn more about his family, you learn about where he lives, he ends up having a relationship, and then you also learn about this police procedural type show that he's on called Black and White, which literally stars a black cop and a white cop. And, you know, there's some commentary in here about where do Asians fit within this very American black and white framework. So because of the writing style of this book, because it is set up in the form of a screenplay, it reads pretty quickly, which is nice. So it has like sort of engaging, compelling pace to it. But also because of the way it's set up, I didn't get the kind of interiority from the main character of Willis that I really like to get in a novel. And then the other thing that I maybe didn't like as much about this book is it's not subtle at all. So, and again, I think that's in part because of the way that it is set up in screenplay format. So, you know, in that kind of format, it's basically all telling and no showing. And so there's no way that you're going to walk away from this book thinking to yourself, gosh, I wonder what Charles Yu was trying to tell me, you know? And I would prefer, like, just a little subtlety in my books, but I think as a sort of experimental format, if you will, that the screenplay format worked well, and like I said, I felt like I found it pretty engaging overall, and I definitely would recommend it, especially given sort of recent violence against Asian Americans in the United States and probably also elsewhere. So I think it's a timely book, and yeah, and I found it sort of funny but also at times poignant, so yeah, I would recommend it. 4 stars. At number, what am I up to? 5. At number 5 was Richard Wright's The Man Who Lived Underground. I had to send this back to the library already. I also gave this 4 stars. This is an unpublished manuscript from Richard Wright that was just released in April of this year, with an accompanying essay that explains what he is doing in the novella called Memories of My Grandmother. I liked the essay more than I liked the actual novella, but I did find that it helped illuminate what Wright is doing, and I like that this is now available because I think it adds to our understanding of Richard Wright's work as a whole, because it is kind of a departure from his usual naturalistic writing, so I think it's valuable for those reasons. So 4 stars, would definitely recommend it if you have an interest in Richard Wright or African American literature more broadly. At number 4 was Danielle Evans' The Office of Historical Corrections, which I also gave 4 stars to. Again, it was a really good reading month. There were a lot of 3.5 stars. There were a lot of 4 stars. So again, no duds here. So I did this as a buddy read with Lindsay of Lindsay's Book Life. Yeah, that's right. That's right. I had like a mind blank for a second. Anyway, so I did this a buddy read with Lindsay, and we both really enjoyed it. Danielle Evans is close to our same age, and this book has this very sort of like millennial feel to it, in the sense that Danielle Evans shares like the same cultural references that Lindsay and I share, and so I think for that reason I got on with the style and the tone of it in a way that, you know, you might not get on with if you are not a millennial. I think she brings a lot of humor to these stories, and even though they deal with sometimes shocking and sometimes very sad and tragic topics, there's still like a lightness about her writing, and there is a lot of humor in it, even with sad and or shocking and tragic things that occur. And I quite liked the title novella, The Office of Historical Corrections. I thought that was really good. There's also a story in here called something like Why Won't Women Just Say What They Want, or something like that, that deals with the Me Too movement, and starts off with an actress tweeting or talking, giving an interview about her, you know, eccentric genius musical boyfriend who's disappeared for a while, and people are wondering where he is, and she says, I don't care where he is, I hope he falls into a volcano. And it just kind of takes off from there, and I quite enjoyed that story as well. So yeah, would definitely recommend this. We'll definitely read more from Danielle Evans in the future. Highly enjoyed it, 4 stars. So now we're up to my top 3 of the month, although again, several of these that I've already mentioned are 4 stars, so I would totally recommend them. And number 3 was A.R. Ammon's long-form poem Garbage, which I also gave 4 stars to. I just think this is a brilliant long-form poem about physical waste that humans produce, but also mental and linguistic garbage and detritus that we produce. So I really enjoyed it. Again, like with the Danielle Evans collection, it was at times humorous, but also at times poignant and moving. And yeah, I just think it's a really well done long form poem. So would definitely recommend it if you are a fan of poetry. 4 stars. At number 2 was Marilynne Robinson's Gilead, which I loved so much. I gave this book 4.5 stars. This was a reread for me. I originally read this over a decade ago in graduate school, and so I remembered that I'd read it before and liked it, but I didn't remember a ton about what happens. It just kind of based the basic premise and setup of the book. But yeah, it's really well done. It talks about it's narrated by the elderly Reverend John Ames, who is writing a long letter to his young son because he knows he's not going to live to see his 7-year-old son grow up, and so he wants to share parts of himself and tell his son things that he won't be able to tell him when he's older. And yeah, and it's really moving. It's a very quiet and reflective and introspective book. There's not a lot that happens here plot-wise. There are a ton of flashbacks and memories to things that happened in Ames's youth, memories of his own father and grandfather, a discussion of how he and his son's mother end up meeting and getting married to one another. And then also a lot to do with the return of Ames's longtime friend, Boughton's son, named Jack, who was actually named after John Ames. His name is John Ames Boughton, but they call him Jack. And so a lot of conflict over whether Reverend Ames wants to tell his wife and young son some things that he knows about Jack Boughton and Boughton's past. So he's really conflicted over whether he should tell them what he knows or not. So yeah, if you like a character study and if you like a slower, quiet, reflective book, this is an excellent book to read. And yeah, I loved it. It's totally everything that I love about books. 4.5 stars. And then my number one read of the month was, of course, Cynthia Ozick's Antiquities, which I gave 5 stars to. Not unlike Gilead, this little novella or long short story is a character study that focuses on, oh, what is this guy's name? Lloyd Wilkinson Petrie. I'm sorry, I read this way back in the beginning of the month, so I didn't remember his name anymore. But yeah, so it's a character study of Lloyd Wilkinson Petrie, who was a trustee of this prestigious boys' boarding school that's now defunct and has been closed for years. And so he's writing a sort of history of his time there to be added to the official history of the school. And he's doing a lot of reflecting on a Jewish boy that he knew while he was a student at this academy named Ben Zion Elephanton. And again, it's just it's a character study. It's very focused. It reminded me in many ways of Kazuo Ishiguro's The Remains of the Day, in the sense that this is like an old repressed white guy who's like sort of slowly starting to uncover that like maybe things weren't exactly the way that he thought that they were. And just like with Kazuo Ishiguro's Remains of the Day, this book made me ugly cry. And because it made me ugly cry, 5 stars! So that is it. That is everything that I read this month. If you have thoughts about any of these books, I would love to hear that. Please feel free to let me know that down in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching this. I hope everyone is staying healthy and well. I hope you're doing good reading whenever you're reading. And until next time, would it kill you to call your mother?